Going to move into a slightly different reality. Before I ask Pam to take us away on the journey of harassment, bullying, I don't know about Medicine Hat, but what we've seen, and we've had organizations, companies contact us in Calgary and even in Edmonton, there seemed to be a correlation between 5 of my colleagues have been laid off, terminated. Now we're overworked. One of us has to do the job of 2.5, and the instances of harassment and bullying begins to spike in the organization. So I hope that's not the case for Medicine Hat, but I can tell you that out there's some ugly instances where just the stress and just the fact of having gone through what Landis outlined, the emotional scars of these instances has had a correlation into these unsavory behaviors. So Pam, take us away in that world that is not that easy to navigate, and we're going to be discussing, of course, strategies and how to recognize, and I'll leave it to Pam.
Thank you, Nicole. Well, those of you who've heard me speak before know that I'm usually quite a loud-voiced person, and believe it or not, I'm a mezzo-soprano, not a baritone, but today I'm a baritone because I visited my grandchildren, and every time I visit them, they give me their hugs and kisses and their colds. So I'm going to do the very best I can. Please bear with me. So what you have in your handout is exactly the PowerPoint. And so today, the objectives of the work, I guess I need to click on the button to move the... The objectives today are to talk about what is harassment and how you educate your employees about harassment and to address accusations of harassment. I want to begin by asking how many people here have already in their company or organization has a policy on workplace harassment and bullying. Everybody? 1 or 2 not? Everybody else, yes? Okay. So what I'm going to talk about here is if you have a policy, that's great. Do people know about it? Do you know about it? Has it been refreshed and reviewed? If you don't have a policy, you should, because it's going to, the policy it just helps you get through whatever these situations are. So we're going to talk about all of these things in the next hour. So what constitutes harassment? Well, first of all, we have harassment under the law, and then we have according to your organization's policies and procedures. And of course, these 2 things should match. And so it's very important that you understand, take a look at what your policies. The policies and procedures don't have to be complicated, and they can refer to the laws. And there's a difference between policy and procedure. The policies simply might tell you what's going on, what the objective is, and then the procedures are the how-to. And you should have both. So why is it important? I'm going to ask those people, has anyone here, if you'd share with me, has anyone here ever believed that they have been the victim of either workplace harassment or bullying? If so, wave your hand at me. A couple, 1, 2, 3, 4, about half the group. And that's not uncommon. And I know when I was a sweet young thing, sexual harassment was just the order of the day. I don't know if any of you have watched the series Mad Men. And we're all women here, I guess, today. Well, back in the day, that's how things were, you know, and it was just okay for there to be sexual harassment in the workplace. Nobody thought anything of it. And as young women, we just had to accept it. And thankfully, we've moved beyond that. But that doesn't mean to say that there's not still all kinds of things that happen in the workplace. So it's important because you want to have a safe, healthy workplace. And Nicole and Landis talked about how layoffs can cause stress. And we know what happens with the human brain is when the human brain is stressed, it doesn't work the same way. You don't have your good decision-making brain at work. You have the part of your brain that just is not going to be thinking very clearly. So a lot of times when there's been a layoff, people become stressed and they're not at their best self. And that's when you can begin to see these unhealthy behaviors in the workplace. And it can change your whole workplace culture. So, and when people stop feeling that they can trust their workplace, and they stop feeling that they can trust each other, it's some of that trust can undermine the kind of relationships that happen in the workplace. So moving on to the law, of course, the Alberta Human Rights Act really spells out very clearly in employment that discrimination in the area of employment based on the protected grounds of race, color, ancestry, place of origin, religious beliefs, gender, age, physical disability, mental disability, marital status, family status, source of income, and sexual orientation. And the reason it's good to kind of highlight these areas is recognizing that these are what people pick on people about. This is what people bully about. You're different than I am. You're gay, or you're from a different country, or you talk funny, or you're short, or you're tall, or you're a male, or you're female, or whatever it is. And people often don't realize that they're discriminating. It's just the way they think. They're programmed that way. So because so much of this is subconscious, when you might address somebody on the fact that they've said something that really does fall under harassment or bullying, they'll say, "What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. I just treat everybody the same." So just understanding that the Alberta Human Rights Act is in Alberta really is there to protect people. But not everybody is aware of it, and not everybody is aware of their own behavior in the area that might be, in fact, breaking this law. So we talk about identifying harassment. So the obvious forms. Can somebody give me an example of an obvious kind of harassment?
Name calling.
Name calling, that's right. And do you see that in your workplace?
No.
Good, good. But it can happen. Another one.
Sexual gestures?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and as I said, when I was a sweet young thing, it was just very common for the men in the workplace to make remarks, and it made us all feel very uncomfortable. The other thing is, so those obvious forms of harassment are there. The other thing is that context matters. So if I'm really good, you know, I'm working with somebody, I've worked with them for 20 years, they've been away on a mat leave, they come back, and I give them a hug. Well, gee, 20 years, that's kind of, well, that happens, never mind. But anyway, and I give them a hug, that's not sexual harassment, that's me hugging a colleague, and there's a mutual consent, and so sometimes people go overboard, and they're afraid that if they get too close to somebody or they look at somebody in the wrong way, oh my goodness, that's sexual harassment. So you need to really consider the context. But if the action of the other person makes you feel uncomfortable, makes you feel uneasy, then it well may be sexual harassment or some other kind of aggressive behavior that is physical harassment. And the other thing is there's some risk involved. So the elements of harassment are that the act is unsolicited and it's undesirable. So unwanted touching, unwanted overtures, unwanted verbal communication. If it's sexual in nature or is directly related to gender. And nowadays we are more sensitive about gender issues. And then within a relationship of authority particularly. Now, it's not to say that there can't be harassment and aggression and bullying between people of the same, in the same kind of job, but most particularly when there's a relationship of authority, that's going to be much more dangerous because that authority is used as a means to coerce someone into something. So sexual harassment is against the law, and it may have long-lasting negative effects on everyone involved. And it can certainly be detrimental to the success of a company. These are those scandalous things that nobody wants to be involved in. And you only have to say, what happened with Bill Clinton? She was an intern, he was the president. Was it sexual harassment? It doesn't matter that it was consensual or she, whatever, he, whatever. The fact is, there was a power differential. So that sort of thing is pretty obvious. So we will have the things of unwelcome touching, jokes or innuendos related to sex, or staring or stalking. And again, you know, back in the day when people would make sexist remarks or jokes, and nowadays it happens less frequently, I think, in my world. Would people agree with that? Yeah. We're seeing less of it. Yeah. Because it's like smoking. Everybody used to smoke everywhere. You know, this room would be full of smoke. That doesn't happen anymore. So again, the common scenarios are making offensive comments, unintentionally brushing against another person, displaying sexual pictures, or sending emails with sexual content. And again, I hope these are all things of the past, but you know, there used to be those calendars that people would put up, and you'd say, oh my goodness, what's the matter with that? That's just a girl in a bikini. Well, you know, it doesn't make you feel all that comfortable. And by the way, don't forget, ladies, that sexual harassment can go the other direction as well. Yes. You know, so we don't want to be, and especially as you get older, where you might, you might be more casual about it. You know, there might be a young man you think you're going to just joke around with because, after all, you're old enough to be his mother and he's kind of cute. And no, it's not okay just because you're a female and he's male. Think about it. If the shoe were on the other foot, what would it look like? What would it sound like? So we really need to be mindful that it works both ways. It's not just one gender against the other. It works both ways. So bullies at work. You know, we hear a lot about bullying. And as a matter of fact, in Alberta, there has been some anti-bullying work done and some really great work done in the schools. And I don't know about you, but how many of you have had children who've been bullied? Yeah, I have. Right. Okay. So what happens with bullying is that somebody is causing the other person to feel really uncomfortable. Either it can be teasing or taunting or stealing their lunch money. But in the workplace, bullying happens too. And so we really want workplaces to be free of bullying. So again, bullying can really affect the mental, physical, and financial health of the bully's target. Well, if they're taking your lunch money, for sure. But in the workplace, you know, when people are, the financial implication is that if you've been bullied, you're going to tend to not want to go to work. Your absenteeism is probably going to increase. Your productivity is going to decrease. And eventually it's going to have a financial impact on you and the organization. So the Safety Council of Canada reports that 1 person in 6 has been bullied and 1 in 5 has witnessed a coworker being bullied. So how many people, we said about half have been bullied, how many people have witnessed bullying? 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, so we're about on par. What happens when you're witnessing bullying? How does it make you feel?
Uncomfortable.
Awkward, uncomfortable, yeah. So yeah, and do you sometimes feel that if you don't say anything that maybe you're a part of it? You know, and that's the worst. Condoning, you're condoning because you really want to speak up and say, hey, you don't do that. But sometimes if it's a supervisor who's doing what looks like bullying, you don't want to say anything because that's the supervisor after all. Or if it's 2 coworkers, you might say, well, I should probably stay out of it. It's not my business. But it doesn't make you feel very good, and it undermines the confidence in the workplace, and it stops that healthy feeling of well-being. So it can involve rudeness and hostility that disrespects the person. So respect is very important. It threats and intimidation, including the abuse of power, and deliberate acts that interfere with the target's work. So if people are doing things to undermine the other person doing their job, and it might be very subtle. Another.
Can you just speak about differentiating between, you know, and a manager trying to do performance management
Okay.
and the interpretation from the employees, oh, you're
Right.
bullying me?
Right.
And my interpretation is, hey, I took the kid gloves off. I'm not handling it.
You took the.
Kid gloves off?
Yeah.
Where you know, at the beginning of the relationship, you're helping them 100%
Yeah.
of the time.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I got to wean you off.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that happens, and it's like, oh, you're bullying me.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And later on in the slide, we have bullying is not enforcing workplace policies and procedures, and it's not providing constructive feedback. That's not bullying. So the idea, again, you're going to do this if you're working, coaching, doing progressive disciplinary action with the person. It's not going to be in public, so there's not going to be other people to witness it. That's one thing, because it can be, the idea is you want to do that in a private way so that you can give them that direct feedback. Secondly, is you want to clarify that you are, as the supervisor, in that role of giving them some feedback about their performance and being very specific about what you're addressing in terms of behavioral model. You're shaking your head, does that?
Yeah, no, keep going, and
Okay.
maybe I'll catch it later
Okay,
on.
okay.
Because, no, I...
Okay, well, we will, okay. Maybe it'll come out. So bullying can be things like spreading rumors and gossip, believe it or not, because of course that's going to undermine how people feel about each other. Making offensive jokes or comments, verbal or in writing. Using insults or put downs. So just going back to your example, Linda, is it Linda? If you were to say, yeah, I like the way you did that, catching people being good, so that's exactly what we're talking about, perfect. But if you say, oh, what's wrong with you? You're just messing up again, that which you wouldn't do. But if you were the kind of a supervisor who did that, then doesn't that kind of sound like bullying? Because you're putting the person down. You're not giving them feedback about what they're doing, but you're really just putting them, oh, what's wrong with you? Are you stupid? Those kinds of comments that are insults. Blaming, scolding, criticizing, or belittling, and especially in front of others. So if you have a staff meeting and you say, well, some people just didn't get their work done on time. And we all know who that is, don't we, Linda? So again, so you belittled the person in public, and again, that's not going to make them, and you say, what? I'm just saying the way everybody knows it, right? Excluding or isolating, so calling a meeting and not inviting that person, because, those kinds of things. Intimidating by standing too close or making inappropriate gestures. And sometimes you got to watch your face, because you might have a facial expression that's going to really come off as a gesture or insulting. Eye rolling. Watch eye rolling, because eye rolling is one of those things. What message does it send you? Like, are you stupid? Yeah. Right? Okay. So another one is making unreasonable demands, constantly changing guidelines, setting impossible deadlines, and interfering with their work. So sometimes somebody will say, I know I don't want this person here anymore, and I don't know how to get rid of them, so I'm just going to make their life so miserable, they're going to leave. And guess what that's called? Constructive dismissal. So you just can't do that. And again, and what does it do to the people around that person? They're going to feel like they can't trust you as a supervisor. Discounting achievements and stealing credit for ideas or work. Again, you want to be fair with people. Disciplining or threatening job loss without reason. Pestering, spying, stalking, or tampering with personal belongings and equipment. So, going into people's desks after work and checking out to see what they're, things like that are never a good idea. And of course, physically abusing or threatening abuse. Although once in a while, we do think, I wish I could just smack them. We think it, but you don't get to do it, Yeah. Yeah. So bullying is not enforcing workplace policies and procedures. That's not bullying. It's not evaluating or measuring performance. When you give somebody a fair performance appraisal and they have not measured met your standard, that's not bullying. That's performance management. Providing constructive feedback is not bullying. Denying training or leave requests with good reason. So, you're just picking on me just because I want to why can't I have Christmas off? Well, I'm sorry you had Christmas off last year. This, our system is you alternate years. I'm not being mean, it's just the way it is. I'm sorry, but discussing disciplinary action in private, that's not bullying. If you continue to do this, it may lead to further disciplinary action, which may include termination. That's not threatening, that's telling them the facts of the situation. Dismissing, suspending, demoting, or reprimanding with just cause. So again, with just cause is not bullying. And that's the difference. And so you may have to address that person who says, I am bullying you, you're bullying me, by saying, actually, I'm not bullying you. Here's your job description. Here's the evidence of the performance that you did. Here's where we see the gap. Now, now in a positive way, you can say, let's talk about how we can improve your performance. Because if all you do is threaten somebody, that's not going to work, right? So you want to say, and I'm sure you do that, let's see how we can improve their performance. But it's very hard if somebody's in the defensive mode and they're not listening, then it's hard to get them to improve their performance. So anti-harassment policies discourage harassing behaviors. So people will know what harassment is, and the idea is to say, this is what it is, let's not do that. It promotes a positive company image, and it helps produce high morale. And again, people often leave their jobs not because they don't like the work, but because they feel they're not comfortable in their work environment, either with coworkers or their supervisor. So an anti-harassment policy. So most of you have it. Those of you who, one or two didn't. So if you have it or you don't have it, if you have it, check your policy. Does it cover what is prohibited? It should state clearly what is prohibited. Second, what are your rights and responsibilities as an employee and as the employer? The third is, what is the process for complaints? If you feel that you have been harassed or bullied, what do you do about it? The fourth is that confidentiality needs to be protected. The last thing you want is people running around talking about this and it just escalates. And then finally, the anti-harassment policy, it should be posted, some of the highlights, or at least where it is. And, just like you have no alcohol is best for babies, then maybe we have a bully-free workplace, or we have a harassment-free workplace. And that becomes one of the culture or the values in your organization's culture. And as you develop and review your anti-harassment policy, it's really important that you involve your employees in that if you possibly can. So you might have a session and say, let's go through this and let's do some scenarios. And I did this with one organization, and people, once they had a chance to really interact with their own policies and procedures and know how to implement them, they were much more comfortable.
We would do lunch and learns quite often.
Yes, exactly. Lunch and learns are a great way to do it. Okay, any questions so far? So,
Breakfast and coffee instead of
yeah.
lunch and learn or breakfast and coffee.
Yeah. And the idea is when you mention, if you say the word policy and procedure to people, they just, So you don't want to call it, they're going to talk about our policy. Just say, you know what, we're going to have an anti-bullying, or let's talk about positive communication in the workplace and have it that way. And then you can get to what does that mean. So in a healthy workplace, you want to clearly define your responsibilities. Your job descriptions help with that, and certainly knowing what the role of managers are and who supervises who, what your responsibilities are in terms of how you need to treat each other with dignity and respect, understanding the laws and the regulations, taking corrective action if there is bullying, you need to do something about it and not just turn a blind eye. And a lot of times people don't like conflict, so they'll say, well, we'll just forget about that. We'll just pretend it's not happening. So you can pretend it's not happening, but it's going to be happening and it's going to surface in some way. And then certainly inviting employee input. So once you've had your session, you might say, does this work for you? Have we missed anything? Does everybody understand it? Can you give us an idea of how we might make things better here? Because of course, if you have a buy-in from your employees, they're going to be much more likely to want to use the policy and procedure and to make it work for them. So Linda, did that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, what it was is, how you can do constructive dismissal. It's kind of that in reverse, is what it was.
Yeah. And what you want to do is, if you have these training sessions, and you can say, this is what bullying is and this is what it isn't. So you can say, guess what? You can still get feedback that you don't like. And that's okay. Yeah, that's all right. It's my job. Yeah, exactly. That's right. You have choices. That's right, yeah. We can't force you to behave this way, but this is how we behave in this workplace, so you choose. That's right. So educating employees, you want to provide employees with copies of the policy. You want to make sure you incorporate the different ways that people learn. Not everybody will take a 4-page policy and read it and understand it. So really breaking it down into something simpler, maybe having a chance to have little group scenarios or role plays is a really good way to do it. I understand some people don't have English as their first language. Some people maybe don't have the same level of literacy. So really being mindful of the learning style of each of your employees. Having signage around, as I mentioned before, this is the bully-free zone, and communicating any updates. And a little update might be a way for you to remind people that you have these policies and procedures and what is expected and what kind of a workplace, and being proud of the fact. You know how when you have health and safety programs and people will say, we've had 700 days with no health and safety injuries, nobody got hurt at work. Well, maybe sometime having the same kind of thing where we say we are a workplace that really supports each other and we value each other.
And may I ask?
Sure.
With the workplace that we've got today, where we've got multiculturalism, diversity, it's really important to go over these points with your staff because you're not sure.
So what I was mentioning is that in this day and age when we have the multicultural and diverse workplaces, you should talk about bullying and harassment because people have different expectations coming from different cultures. And you need to talk about the Canadian workplace and what it's all about. So that's how we've approached it. It's gone over very well, and it's an aha moment for people. And the other folks from different cultures then get to share, well, you know what happens back home? This is what we would do back home. And so it really is a better appreciation for everyone that's in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same thing with difference in generations. Back in my day, we would do this. Well, guess what? This is the 21st century, so now we're going to do things in a different way. And that's a good thing. And as we learn about each other's frames of mind and mindsets and cultures, it can really help us. So anti-harassment policies in the workplace should be broad and written in easy-to-understand terms. Sometimes these things come down from on high, and they may not be. So you may want to talk to your corporate office about could we create a simpler version, a more plain language version of it, if that's necessary. They should be circulated to everyone who's required to operate under the rights and responsibilities. So often it'll be given in the first, in that onboarding time when you give everybody those policies and procedures, and then people forget about it. And we talked about the fact that when you're first onboarding, you get so much information, you're not going to remember it. So again, maybe at the annual performance review might be a time to just say, just going to take a minute here and talk about our policies on whatever those important policies are. And anti-harassment policy statements, there's the different kinds of harassment spelled out. Physical, which is actual or threatened assault. Verbal, which is unwelcome remarks. Psychological, shunning or ostracizing, stalking or staring. And intimidation, physical or organizational power to coerce. And if you are aware of any of these things in your workplace and you haven't been comfortable talking about it, it's important for you to identify it and then talk to someone else about it, talk to your supervisor about it and say, I've noticed this. Because what happens if you don't deal with something? It gets worse. It's going to just brew and brew. Or it becomes the culture of a place. And you'll have people say, oh gosh, it's just the most awful workplace. And I've just am now retiring from my employee assistance program counseling. So I did a lot of counseling with people who would come, with workplace stress. And guess what most of the stress was about? This. So I had an example of one young man who had an accent. And so he was just dismissed in his workplace. People would say, oh, I don't understand you. His supervisor would say, I can't understand what you're saying. Well, that's not okay. It's not, the person needs to have some accommodation perhaps, or you need to learn how to understand them in a better way. Things that people would come that somebody was bullying or harassing them, but they didn't feel comfortable to speak out about it. And they would say, oh, well, this has been happening in this workplace for a long, long time. And I said, well, then what happens? Well, mostly people just leave. So you might have a supervisor who is a bully, and people just keep leaving. And the people that are coming in are suffering from anxiety and depression in a big way that has been created or certainly made much, much worse by this workplace. So, and of course we know that mental health causes some of the highest absenteeism and costs to industry. So, this isn't just sort of, oh, well, it's a nicety. It's actually, if you don't fix this in your workplace, it would be like having a big piece missing from a machine that you need. The machine's not going to run properly. So it's really important. You're talking about the mental health of your employees, and it doesn't go away. So you really want to be mindful of it. So again, you want to make sure that the person understands the policies and procedures. So the person who thinks that that getting, not getting their day off that they want is harassment needs to understand that, it's not. It's like when my kids used to say, when they first brought in that kid hotline, child abuse hotline, and the kids said, okay, you're yelling at me, or you're telling me to do my dishes, and I'm going to phone the child abuse hotline. I said, you go ahead, honey. You go right ahead and phone them. But, they need to understand, no, having to do your job is not harassment. Attending training is something you might want to say. Some people say, oh, well, I don't like going to those kind of touchy-feely. Well, guess what? You need to do, it's part of your job description. And then the other thing is just really avoid those kinds of behaviors that are prohibited. So that's the employee's responsibility. The employer's responsibility is to promote a workplace free of harassment. You can't just say, oh, well, people will be people, and sometimes some people are nasty, and they just have to be that way. No, your job is to create a workplace that's safe. And again, think about your external customers. We're talking about your internal customers, but your external customers, the people that are getting their goods and services from you, your clients, the students, the residents in the places, whatever that is, the customers that are buying from you. If there's a culture of bullying, hostility, harassment, it's going to leak out to the customer service end of things, and it's going to affect your bottom line. Somebody who doesn't feel good, who doesn't feel happy, is going to have a tough time putting on that happy face. And distributing the policy, responding to violation, and securely protecting reports. So again, if you do get a report, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to handle those. So this is a really, really simple statement. The XYZ Corporation is committed to a working environment free from sexual, racial, religious, and personal harassment. That's just a very broad statement. And then from there are all of the particulars that are involved. So I would urge you to, if you don't have one already, you can check online and see get some samples of workplace harassment, anti-harassment policies. And a very good resource for this is, and I'll just, a very good resource for this is the Alberta government website, the ALICE website. And they've got a whole pages of tip sheets on anti-bullying and what's involved in that. So in order for the process to go as smoothly as possible, people need to follow proper procedures if they're being harassed or if they're accused of harassing someone else, because it can be equally as damaging to an employee who's falsely accused of harassment and bullying as the person who is the victim. And sometimes people will retaliate in some way by accusing their manager or a coworker of, which is what's happened, you're just bullying me. So we have to be careful. And the thing about it is it can be really if you aren't able to get to that fine line where you're comfortable, then you in fact might find yourself backing down from an employee who really does need supervision, and they need some support in that. So in terms of using the policy, if your policy should have definitions or descriptions of the behavior we're talking about, and have examples, and describes what is and is not considered harassment. It tells you who to tell, so usually it'll tell you to tell your supervisor. It describes the process of reporting harassment. It describes the outcome and protections for parties involved, and it protects confidentiality. So for those of you who do have policies and procedures on harassment, are all these things covered? Yeah? Okay. So again, it's just making sure that the employees are aware of that, and that all the managers are, because sometimes people are brought on and they're promoted to a manager's role, and we've missed the step of making sure they really have a good understanding of what this policy is. So if you are being harassed, you need to tell the harasser to stop. They may not be aware that it's harassment. I didn't say anything, I was just making a joke, Well, your jokes make me feel uncomfortable. Consult the proper people and document it. So it's important that that if the person is being harassed, that they feel comfortable to talk to their supervisor about it. Now, you don't want to go around saying, is anybody harassing you? Are you being bullied? But you also want to make it okay for somebody to come and say, I'd like to report an incident. And if you are accused of harassment, you don't want to just ignore it, and you want to, again, consult your supervisor about it and explain your side. So, it might be the case that, if you're a manager and the person's saying you're harassing them, you may want to go to your supervisor and say, look, this is what's happening. This is what I said, this is what he said, and this is what's going on here. So, I don't believe that I'm harassing someone, but I'm certainly open to having the situation reviewed so that you know that you're on solid ground. So sometimes there's going to be an investigation, and again, there may be more information required. There will need to be written and verbal reports, and there might be corrective action, or if further investigation might be required. So again, we're going to look to the company's policy. What happens when, if this, then what? The nature of the incident, and then alleged history. Is this something that happened one time, or is this a pattern? So if somebody makes an unpleasant remark once, and they didn't really realize it, that's an opportunity for learning, and that's not something that you can say, okay, that's it, you were a bully and now you're out the door. It may be an opportunity to educate them. But if you have somebody and you've documented and you have a pattern of people who just continue to do the same thing over and over again, you're probably dealing with somebody who you need to do something about it. Now, we mentioned false allegations. So the best way to professionally confront a false allegation is to go through the right chain of command in order to plead your case and bring peace and justice back to your reputation. So again, you don't want to be victimized by a false allegation. So this is where communication and documentation is very important. Who said what? And sometimes as a supervisor, it's really hard for you because you've got no way of knowing. One person will say one thing, the other person will deny it. Has anybody had that experience? So, Nicole?
Very uncomfortable position to be in.
Yeah. So any words of advice on that one?
Just doing due diligence with the other team members to see if there's anything that is going to bubble up to the surface.
Yeah.
Because as long as it stays into the tit for tat, then, I faced once the decision of actually letting go of both people.
Yeah.
Because there was no way of getting to the bottom of the situation, and taking a risk and letting a cancer grow.
Yeah.
So ended up dismissing both parties.
And sometimes you may have to sit both people down and say, this is what it is, What's that?
This is between you.
Yeah.
This conflict.
Yeah.
Have a conversation,
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah.
And try and figure and resolve it yourself.
Yeah, sometimes that's, or we'll talk a little bit later about bringing in, you can bring in an outside mediator to try and help resolve the situation. Can be a little expensive, but probably not as expensive as replacing those two employees or, so.
But the problem is that when it hits productivity, then you're faced with a no-win situation
Yeah.
as a company, as an organization.
Yeah.
Because everybody else gets sucked into it.
Exactly.
So it's not
Yeah.
anymore two people at each other's throat, it's
Everybody.
polarizing the rest
Yeah.
of the team.
Yeah. And again, there's a difference between bullying and harassment and just regular old-fashioned conflict between two people. And sometimes you have to, you have to take a step back and say, oh, wait, so you ask yourself, is there a power differential? Was there consent? What was the circumstances? What happened? Sometimes when people have romantic relationships in the workplace, yeah, and then it goes south. And then,
Great when you're in love.
oh yeah,
And then you fall out of love, you're in
yeah.
trouble.
Yeah, but meanwhile, you have to work together. And there's, oh my goodness, then. So you really have to identify to each of those employees that, look, this is the workplace behavior that we expect from you, and this is what we have to deal with. So you're going to have to find a way to get over this because you need to be here and working. Yeah.
Sometimes it could be a personality clash, like you have
Yeah.
a very strong personality and the other person is meek and mild.
Yes.
And it's like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
but that she has to.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's part of her job. She
Yeah.
has to talk.
Yeah. Exactly. And again, coaching people, sometimes understanding the difference in personality types, sometimes understanding the difference in communication styles, sometimes teaching people how to communicate in a way that won't sound like criticism. Because what happens with that, you have criticism, then the other party becomes defensive, then people become contemptuous of each other, and then communication breaks down and the walls go up, and then the relationship is toast. It's not going to work. So again, can you foster communication that is open and that people feel safe, and that sometimes people need a cooling down period. So you might just say, let's just leave this till next week. Just try and, mind your own business. Then we'll come back and talk again. But it's really, you got to be careful that as a manager, you don't wind up in a triangulation between people. And they will try, oh, well, he's doing this and she's doing that. And it's okay, you know what? Yeah, exactly. And it wears you out. And it's amazing how people can turn into adolescents when they get emotionally involved. So, yeah, that's sort of not exactly workplace harassment and bullying, but it kind of can be in that category because you have to ask yourself, well, is it?
Back to your other point about
Yeah.
Pam's the ESL, English as
Yeah.
a second
Yeah.
language. How we communicate with
Yeah.
someone who doesn't understand, or even the inflections in our voice
Yeah.
sometimes can be interpreted as harassment or bullying.
Yeah,
when
exactly.
It's not intended that way
Yeah.
at all, so it's
Yeah.
understanding that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's some of us, like I get quite excited and probably my
Burst
voice,
into song?
I might, yeah, not today, but I get quite excited and I might find myself saying something in a very forceful way, and somebody who's, will say, oh, well, gee, she yelled at me. And it might be, oh, did I? I mean, maybe you did, but maybe you didn't. So again, what is the intention? And do we know each other well enough? And sometimes we do mess up in our communication. Sometimes we have to go back and say, oh, you know what, I'm so sorry. I think my voice was a little loud, and what I was trying to say was this. But the other times might be just, you know what, I'm just telling you the way it is, and we're going to have to understand each other. So it can be, and certainly understanding, in some cultures, males don't like to take instructions from females. And so it can be kind of like, I'm not listening to you. And then as the female, you may have to say, yeah, I am the boss of you. So it's tricky. It's tricky. So in terms of if you are falsely accused, don't confront the accuser. That's probably going to make things worse. And there may be some hostility going on. So you really want to go to your supervisor and, go to your policies and procedures and what do you do if you are accused of harassment, and just follow along with that. Confidentiality is crucial. Nothing's worse than a gossip happening, and sometimes people will have their reputation ruined by an allegation that wasn't true. And so you really have to be very quiet and mindful of that when you conduct the investigation. And you're only going to be talking to the people who can add to the story, not to people that have nothing to do with it. And so, and it's very difficult. And you have to say to people, this is confidential, please don't say anything. And of course they will, even though you ask them not to. And then,
You say those words.
oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Did you? Oh well, I only told so and so. But again, you try to, if you try to, but in your training, when you train people about the policies, if you can say, put yourself in the other person's shoes. Imagine what it would feel like if you were wrongly accused. So please don't do that. Let's help us protect everybody's. And sometimes people will say, okay, he did that to me. Now what are you going to do about it? We're going to say, you know what? The disciplinary action of another employee is not your business. So thank you for reporting it, but you may or may not hear what's going to happen. And somewhere down the road, we're going to try and give you some resolution that yes, your concern was dealt with, and yes, we went through our processes, but it may be a while, and you may see that person still walking around here because you don't know what we've done, and it's not up to us to tell you. And that can be really disconcerting for people because they want the person in a pillory. They want a big, brand on their head that says this person did them wrong. So again, that's where confidentiality is very important. So again, you want to monitor the situation. You make sure the process is working, and you need to monitor the work environment because you're going to see some spill off. You're going to see some reactions. Retaliation can be common if somebody's accusing somebody else of harassment or bullying. And again, you want reporting or cooperating. Ideally everybody will put things in writing and they'll be cooperative, and you'll be able to spell out the corrective action to the person. So again, if somebody is found to have been guilty of harassment or bullying, according to your policy, you may look at, but the other person disagrees, they may dispute it, and you may look at mediation. Sometimes, in this particular presentation, they talked about people going to court, but I don't know, this was an American source, so I don't think that's going to happen in Canada. We're not that kind of culture, but certainly it might not be a bad idea to have some mediation if that's what's needed. So, again, this is just about appealing. So sometimes there's going to be a union involved, and I asked that question at this table. They don't have a union. Anyone here working in a union environment? No? Okay, so sometimes if there's a union environment, there's going to be, the union will serve as an advocate. There'll be a written account. You'll have to deal with how the union deals with those particular situations. And again, there's rules and regulations and policies and procedures of the union as well. So just because there's a union doesn't mean people get to do whatever they want. Sometimes people are of the opinion, oh, well, I've got seniority in my union, I can do anything, And sometimes it seems like they can, but in fact, they can't. So again, conflict resolution, it includes negotiation, mediation, and diplomacy. And again, knowing what's the difference between two employees who are having a conflict or a situation where one employee is abusing another person. And even if one person has, you've done whatever you've done and everything is resolved, you still have to work together and the rest of the team is involved. But if you do have to use mediation, it's usually an outside party where each person will have a representative, and you're going to try and have some kind of a compromise or settlement. And I think things would have to be pretty extreme to go to this level, but it certainly is available. And so mediation, again, it's non-biased, third party from inside or outside the company is introduced to help, charged with helping the two parties involved come to a middle ground of resolution. So if you have two individuals working for you and you just can't seem to get things working, then mediation might be a way to go. And again, it's probably less expensive and less stress than letting people go, and it seeks to reestablish a positive relationship. And again, this just talks a little bit more about the mediation. I won't worry too much about that. Again, you want to, in terms of the mediation, though, seeing both sides, looking at the facts and understanding that there's two different perspectives. And sometimes it's easy to get drawn into something and you find yourself on the side of one person or another, and that's really going to be dangerous for you. So really trying to be impartial, and if you can't, that's where you need to bring in somebody else from your team or from the outside. Because, of course, being fair and rational is really important.
I have a question. So even before you reach the mediation point, would there not be an opportunity to see an investigation to see if it was really?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. So this is the mediation. Like, of course, you want to do the investigation and find out what happened. But if you can't, or even if that happens, but then you still have to try and reestablish some balance. Yeah. So deciding the consequences, this is where HR managers, or now at this table, people are all HR managers in addition to being the manager of your division. So you, again, it's also good though, you can consult and support each other in deciding what to do and the appropriate punishment. So depending on what the circumstances are, it may be dismissal. It may be re-educating the person. It may be some suspension. It may be a written warning, all those kinds of things. But it may include termination if it's serious enough. And again, this then crosses back over to Landis's presentation on termination, because you're then going to terminate with cause based on the evidence that you've found in your investigation. It doesn't mean the person can't dispute it, though they might. So afterwards, it's critical for the harasser and the harassed to find the best way to move on with life so that the experience does not define life for them. So is it possible for people to have this kind of situation and then work together after? I hope so. Sometimes not. And that's where you have to, and then how do you decide who leaves, right? It's pretty tricky. In a big organization, you might invite somebody to transfer, but if you transfer them, you may be looking at this constructive dismissal thing that, hey, how come I'm the one who had to be transferred? He was the one who picked on me. So it's not just sort of this equals that. It's all kinds of levels of complication. And sometimes you do want to consult with your lawyer before you move too far forward on these things, because they can be quite damaging for your company. And nobody wants to be accused. If you're an employer and you are not protecting your employees from harassment, sexual harassment, physical harassment, then you are responsible. So you can't just ignore it. It's your responsibility to protect your employees. So again, you want to move on, making sure the company's policies are followed, and hoping that people can forgive and forget. But again, you're going to want to monitor the accused and the employee, be mindful of action. You don't want to be paranoid, but you also don't want to set up a situation where the same thing's going to happen again. And you hope that people learn from their mistakes. So sometimes these things are unintentional. Sometimes these things are unconscious, they're cultural, people didn't mean it, they just had a moment where they really were thoughtless, and then this is an opportunity to make them even better at being good with their team. You want to be mindful of the actions and, they're intentional, unintentional. So sometimes they are intentional, and if they're intentional, again, you want to say, this is not okay, this is going to stop, this is not permitted in this workplace, this is what the policy says about this. So if it happens again, we're going to have a talk, and it may include progressive disciplinary action up to and including termination. Do you have any questions about that? Right, so that's going to be the thing. And again, people need to understand the relationship between how they behave in the workplace and what it means for others. So that's the basics of, how am I doing for time? Okay,
We're doing great. We've got time for
Got time.
discussion.
Okay.
We've got time for questions.
Okay. So the idea here is that we really want to improve our knowledge of workplace harassment. So I think we can just, I'm going to just show the last slide, which is just some words from the wise. So John F. Kennedy said, one man or woman can make a difference and everyone should try. Again, you can see the difference in the culture just from when this statement was made back in the 60s. Napoleon Hill, he's the guy who did Think and Grow Rich. Victory is always possible for the person who refuses to stop fighting. So I guess the idea here is that sometimes in order to make things better, you just have to keep trying. You just have to keep working at it. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. And boy, oh boy, in today's world, I'm beginning to think that's a very, very apt description.
It's more the latter than the former.
Exactly. So I think the tricky part for all of us is it's one thing to have a policy and procedure. Yeah, we know what to do. But as humans, it's really hard when it comes down to the actually, how do you do it? So maybe we could open up the floor for just talking about some scenarios and problem solving, and we could help each other as a group. Does anybody have any situations?
What happens in here stays in here.
I think for myself, if I have to say, if I've learned one thing, it's get it out on the table. Like, don't delay. If you hear a rumor or an inkling, talk to the person, get it out on the table. The quicker you do that, and you can have, like, if it's, somebody's complaining about somebody else, and you're still at the beginning, at least you have a chance that those two folks might be able to talk to each other. Definitely, I would say it's not going to go away until you do something, and the longer you delay, it's that problem will be that much bigger.
Absolutely. So, is everybody comfortable with that? What would you say to get that on the table?
It depends who's coming to me or if I'm catching wind of it. They're completely two different situations. If it's somebody that's, I'm just catching wind of it, I might just put some feelers out to find out what's really going on. Because, to me, harassment and bullying is not the one-time instance. That's like, okay, somebody had a bad day, can we talk about that? Like, what happened? If you see the pattern, totally different ballgame. If they're coming to you, you gotta get both sides of the story. And I'm telling you, there are two sides to every story. And you wonder, do people even talk to each other? We're at the same place, because it is mind-blowing how different it can be, which speaks to how the communication is between people and their perception. People see the truth from their eyes.
Absolutely.
She's got blue eyes, I got brown eyes, we're seeing things totally different. One of the things I'm finding is with the youngins, as I call them, 20-year-olds, and I think it's technology, we're losing the ability to communicate effectively with each other. And I'm realizing these people have no problem-solving skills. You're thrown into a work environment, you were expected to work with your manager and to talk to them. And it's like, what? I don't have a cell phone, I kept it. So certainly I'm seeing where the new employees come out don't have the communication skills like some of us old people.
Yes, Nicole.
So I'm going to jump in on this one because we are living in a very unusual environment. It's the first time in the history of work that there's 5 generations at the same time at work. And to me, when I look at the intergenerational factors, it means 5 different cultures. Because my generation communicates very different from a millennial, from a Gen Y, from a Gen Z,
or X or whatever the generations are. And so if we don't understand that way of communication, if we don't understand the language, these issues just absolutely proliferate and fester. So a millennial might solve a conflict by texting. We don't do that. And, you know, we don't talk enough about the fact that there's 5 different streams of human beings in the workplace, side by side, and the company's expectation is one. The policies haven't been adjusted, the processes haven't been modified. It doesn't matter if you are 20 years old or if you are 60 years old, one size fits all. When has one size fits all ever worked? So, you know, when I teach conflict management, and when I hear the stories that come into the class, I just keep shaking my head, Pam, because until we get the organizations to understand that they're dealing with different people,
Right.
it's like taking a mini United Nations and, you know, stop having one policy.
Yeah.
I can go there. So if, if employee to employee bullying isn't bad enough, we work in a retirement residence, and the newest thing out there is resident to resident bullying. Senior bullying,
Yeah.
families to staff
Yeah.
bullying.
Oh, boy.
And the senior to senior bullying gets really interesting when you have a little dementia.
Oh,
So
yeah.
is
boy.
it dementia talking, or is it?
Exactly.
I mean, your whole day can be consumed
Absolutely.
just chasing down little snippets of
Yeah.
information that are quite irrelevant.
Yeah.
But if you don't, it's going to the government.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting talking about how things have changed, times have changed. It's not unusual for a young person to say, I don't have to do that. I'm not doing that. You know, I just saw that with my 4-year-old granddaughter. I'm not doing that. And I'm thinking, okay, she's 4. But then you see it sometimes in a 24-year-old or 44-year-old. They get these sorts of things that are people who just simply dig their heels in and say, no, I'm not doing that. Now, some of them are certainly intergenerational expectations, because we just did a group of 12 millennials, people, in the classroom, I would get my opinions about what they were doing. But it was interesting because each of them, they had a group assignment of creating a video project of what to describe millennials. And it just blew me away how great they were, how well they could communicate, what a good work ethic they showed in that project. But you never would have believed it from the regular kind of behavior you would have seen in the classroom, because it was different than what we would have, you know, prying people. No, you can't be texting. No, you can't be sleeping. No, you know. No, you can't just walk out in the middle of a sentence to go to the bathroom, because it's not okay. But they themselves pointed out the fact, hey, our generation got an award for everything. Our generation, if the teacher wasn't nice to us, our mom was there saying, what's wrong? Why are you being mean to my son or daughter? And they showed me that. So I think we definitely are. And then we have old school people like me who say, suck it up, buttercup. I had to put up with that, so should you. So we wind up with this conflict that's there. And what is it? I mean, honestly, I can tell you what we went through as young people was definitely harassment and bullying. There's no question. But nobody questioned it because it was okay in those days. Nowadays, we have to be careful because we want to be sure that we aren't saying what maybe we shouldn't. Yeah, we have to think.
People can walk on eggshells, that
Yes.
because you're worried that you're going to offend someone, you're worried
Yeah.
about it's going to be intergenerational, did they interpret it from my ears to your ears, what's
Yeah.
in your ears?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's so much.
Challenging.
Yeah, and that's where getting that communication in whatever way you can do is really important. So if somebody prefers to communicate by text, maybe that's okay, you know? Like I know a lot of people, well, my kids, my youngest son is 26, he doesn't like talking on the phone. He'll text, and my other, you know, they'll text for hours, but don't ask me to have a phone conversation. Like you know, and I'm thinking, okay, what would it feel like to meet? Would it be like the Pony Express or something, you know, that I'm thinking it's that? Don't be silly, we don't communicate that way. So I think getting that communication. So what I want to talk for a minute about stress. I came back from a workshop on anxiety, and so I'm going to be presenting one on anxiety in the workplace because I believe that a lot of the behaviors that we're seeing are the result of stress. We just talked about those downsizings, talk about uncertainty, talking about you've just seen half your workforce laid off and you're left and you've got so much to do. Or you're dealing with people with dementia, or those families who are demanding things, or those coworkers who won't get along. What is that stress doing to you?
Or, you've got a stress of home life.
Yes.
Coming into the workplace, because we've got
Yeah.
way more anxiety at home
Yes.
that is coming, filtrating into the workplace.
Absolutely. So you've got people going through divorce or separation. Or now we have a lot of kids who have problems. So you're trying to deal with your kid problems, or your parents are getting to those health issues. So you've got all these things, and then we get to work, and we're supposed to be all happy. So some of the things you want to do for people, if you have an employee assistance program, refer people to it. If you don't, refer people to mental health resources that are available for free through Alberta Mental Health, or through Medicine Hat Family Services has counseling based on income, so it isn't as expensive. But a half a dozen sessions can make a huge difference in teaching people how to cope with stress and anxiety. And it actually changes the brain, and people are not functioning well when they're under that chronic stress. So I would strongly urge, policies and procedures are important, training your staff, but be mindful. How can you create a workplace that has less stress? And how can you help people? And it can be simple things like giving people breathing breaks and walking breaks, and encouraging exercise, and encouraging people to take their vacation, and encouraging people to have safe places to go to debrief after trauma. If you've had trauma in a place, often when you're dealing with vulnerable people and people die, do you have some sort of grieving that's going to happen? Breathing for staff. So having some supports for people, because you think, oh, well, we're professionals, we can deal with it. I know when I worked in an organization and we lost people, after a while it wears you thin. You get attached to people and you're human. So again, look at how can you support your staff in positive ways before it gets ugly. So, I really believe in the power of positivity and finding what's right, and mostly about 95% of things are good, but darn, that last 5% that isn't can sort of mess up the whole thing. So thank you very much.
5%.
What's that?
If you didn't have the 5%, you wouldn't realize how nice the 95 is.
Exactly. And we know we have to have negativity, or would there be no contrast to have the positivity. So it's good. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll turn things over to Nicole.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely awesome, and a real good, solid primer
Of what harassment and bullying is, and certainly from the experiences, what can be done. So just to add a couple of tidbits, just from personal experiences, and you're not in a unionized environment, but in a unionized environment, no measure can take place until the union says, we did everything. And that goes to stress and anxiety, because I have yet to meet a union that works lickety-split. So I have somebody quite close. The process now has been going on to 2 years. This person by now has exhausted medical days, vacation day, has had to go on unemployment, and now is looking at long-term disability because the organization cannot solve the issue. And it is supervisor to direct report. So, if you don't think that horror stories happen out there, they do. And as a human being, you are one person with this huge machinery, and what are you going to do? You still need to feed the family. So thank you very much for all of this great information. The other thing that's happening, how many of you might have heard that the Alberta government now is coming out with the psychological safe working place? So the legislation is in the House, and it is waiting for its final reading. And now, under protected grounds, the psychological safe working place will be one of the requirements. My understanding is that the document actually lists 13 different behaviors that are going to be required to be accommodated by companies, by organizations, in order to demonstrate that it is a psychologically safe workplace. Great initiative, lots of potential for issues. Because now Pam looked at me with a small smile. Now, was that a smile, or was she being derogatory to me, and I'm now psychologically unsafe? So do follow what's going on. Keep checking the media. My understanding is that we should be hearing momentarily, and the minute this comes out, it's legislation, and every organization, small, medium, large, humongous, organization of 1.5 will need to have in place policies for the psychologically safe. So for you ladies, I can just go like this and try to figure out what that looks like. So not to add stress and anxiety, but just to inform. So, yeah, I know, but you know what? Better to know than all of a sudden open the newspaper and go, oh my God, now what am I going to do with this, right? Plus, employment standards are being under scrutiny. I'm going to be part of a panel in a couple of weeks looking at what this revised legislation is going to mean. We're going to be turned completely around. Yeah. But they've already indicated all of the areas that are going to be basically looked at. So anybody around the tables that works in policies and procedures, get your running shoes on, because everything is going to have to be reviewed, amended, updated. Have I made your day yet? Yeah, I knew it. I was just trying. So, any questions, last questions for Pam or Landis? Ladies, thank you very much. It was awesome. I really appreciate all that information and work. To all of you, thank you for making our last session in Medicine Hat this season absolutely delightful. Randy, again, thank you very much. I know how time-consuming it is, all that you do. And while the chamber is out of the room, you're all members of the chamber, so do remember to thank them, because it's thanks to them that we're able to be all together. Thank you. Have a great end of the week, and maybe we'll see you next season. Take care.